So, Masha, thank you very much for coming to VOA and agreeing to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Um, you've, spent most of your career in Moscow looking at um, Russian society from many different angles, and so much is happening right now in Moscow, looking out at the world towards Ukraine, things happening in the Middle East, the domestic political situation within this very dynamic, changing country. What's something that just leaps out at you that you would like to comment on first? What strikes you, having just come recently from Moscow back to the United States?
So what's the one thing I want the world to know about Russia? Um, well, I was actually most recently in Moscow in May, so I'm still going back and forth. I moved to this country permanently in December, but I'm still reporting from Russia a fair amount. I think that what needs to be clear is that what Russia is going through now is sort of the third and final stage of Putin's rule, and it's the final stage. It's the most dangerous. It's the scariest. It may last a very long time. It may not, but everything up till now has been working up to this stage. And if the first stage of his regime, which was probably the first 5 years, was destroying the democratic gains of the 1990s. So it was actually very systematic. He dissembled the electoral system. He took over the state. The Kremlin took over the media. Over the course of 5 years, every level of elections was either canceled entirely, like with the gubernatorial elections, or transformed beyond recognition. And then there was a period of sort of affluence and stasis after that had gone into effect, and a sort of a system of balance of fear and power and money had taken hold. And now for the last 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years, we've been living through an all-out political crackdown that has led to the war with Ukraine. And that's the only word to call it. There is a war between Russia and Ukraine, and that is leading to the agonizing death of all the independent media, what remains of the independent media in Russia, and it's an all-out crackdown on political dissent.
What prompted the shift to the final phase? Do you think it was preconceived, or was it sort of just a natural evolution?
I think it's a natural evolution. I think it was also fear. I mean, he was terrified when the protests broke out, and because in his mind there's no such thing as something that sort of grows naturally. I mean, he couldn't actually conceive of a protest movement or a protest culture the way that we conceive of it, and the way that I think is right, is that people, for a variety of reasons, some because actually they'd gotten wealthier and their priorities changed, and some because they learned more about what was going on, and some because they just couldn't take it anymore. But for a variety of reasons, many people from very different walks of life, and actually with a variety of political views, came together for these mass protests. In Putin's mind, that's impossible. He sees everything as coming from above. So what is actually happening in his mind is that, first of all, he believes the Kremlin made grave mistakes that led to the appearance of the protest movement, right? That perhaps Vladislav Surkov, his former ideologue and main political operative, perhaps Surkov created too many movements.
But if I may, these mistakes that you referred to probably in Putin's mind went back a lot farther. That the things he's trying to correct.
Putin has a pretty short horizon, so I don't think he was thinking back to 2004 and the mistakes they made then. He felt like in 2011, Surkov did something very, very wrong, and something went wrong. So that's one idea. The other idea that is also very strong and that has been key in this whole transformation is that there has to be a puppeteer, right? So it has to be the United States. I mean, that was why Putin's first reaction to the protests was that he felt that he said that they were personally inspired by Hillary Clinton. And the reason is that in his view, like when he sees all these protesters, he sees not people protesting the regime, but people protesting Russia itself. Well, who can protest the state itself? Only an enemy of the state. And who's the enemy? It has to be foreigners. The foreigners have to be driven by somebody. So clearly it's Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State at the time. That was why the initial stages of the crackdown were so focused on foreign agents, because that's a very literal expression of what Putin saw.
Most people look at Ukraine and see Russia's involvement as Putin and the Kremlin not wanting Ukraine to slip over to the West, to have NATO on its doorsteps. Is that the way you look at it, or do you see other motivations behind this very strong resistance of Moscow to Ukraine's changing its political orientation?
No, I see a lot more there. And actually, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see it. You just have to listen to what they're saying. What Putin is saying, what his current chief ideologue, Alexander Dugin, is saying, what they've been talking about for the last couple of years, and what's really got traction in Russia, and not just in Russia, is this idea of a civilizational conflict. And Dugin, to quote him, he says there's a Western civilization that believes that there is such a thing as universal human rights, and that promotes a post-gender, as he puts it, and post-human reality. And by this he means sort of the specter of homosexuality and transsexuality and all sorts of scary things that threaten tradition. And the Western civilization wants to impose its values on the rest of the world. And Russia's position is fine. You know, you want to do that in the West, you can do that. But don't force it on us. There is no such thing as universal human rights. There's only, in our civilization, we believe in tradition. So there's Western civilization and there's traditional civilization. And Russia is positioning itself as the leader of the traditional civilization, as the leader of the anti-Western world. And that also has also grown out of the initial political crackdown, because the part of it was calling the protesters foreign agents, and the other part was calling them gay. And the anti-gay legislation, the anti-gay rhetoric that began about 2.5 years ago really gathered speed and really helped create or place a national identity, which Russia had been lacking. And this national identity is as the leader of the anti-Western world, as the defender of traditional families, as the defender of traditional religions. And so Russia now has this ambition of creating an anti-Western coalition in the world, and actually it's had some success.
So one more question for you, Masha, would be the state of the media in Russia today. Can you give us some thoughts on that?
Right. Well, a few years ago I was a magazine editor. Now about half the people that I used to work with have changed professions. Some of them are very happy in their new fields, but they just realize that there's no place for them to work. And I think the other half probably realizes that they're working in their last jobs in journalism, because there's no place to work unless you want to service the propaganda machine. Basically what has happened is, again, I mean, there has been an ongoing crackdown on the media since Putin came into office. On his first day in office, his first day in the Kremlin, there was a raid on the offices of Media Most, the largest independent media holding at the time. Within a year, the state controlled all the broadcast television channels. And then we went through a very, very long period of sort of space closing in slowly. Now we're going through the final stages of space closing in totally and completely. So there's one independent television channel, which is TV Rain, which was dropped by 80% of its cable and satellite providers last winter. So they lost all of their advertising as a result, because their audience has dropped by about 80%. And also because they've become pariahs. They had to cut their broadcast hours by half. They had to cut staff by a third. They've cut salaries. They raised enough money to keep going through 3 months, but their lease is running out next week, and I think they're going to shut down very, very soon. And it's like, it's like death watch for a number of these outlets. Another television channel in Tomsk, the last remaining independent regional television station, the last remaining one, is struggling to survive and has been off the air for most of the last few months. What else has happened recently? Well, even the leeway that federally owned television and print media are allowed, that's really been taken away, right? So for the longest time, there was this idea that there was going to be a more conservative state-owned broadcast agency and a less conservative one. The more conservative one was TASS, and the less conservative one was RIA. And within RIA, you could have small pockets of sort of quasi-independent reporting. I don't know how useful that kind of illusion of free speech is. I think in some ways it's more insidious than just like doing pure propaganda. But in any case, Putin liquidated RIA Novosti in December and replaced it with Russia Today, with the most odious propagandist in Russia at the helm. And that's been sort of at the forefront of the war effort. And of course, a lot of what's happened is the mobilization of the media that's necessary for the war effort in Ukraine. So I think, the Consumer Authority has blocked access to several online outlets. The largest online outlet was also taken over by the state, that's Lenta.ru, and the smaller ones like Grani.ru and EJ.ru, which are small news outlets, news and analysis, you can't access them from Russia. You can access them by going through proxies, but really that's like cut their audiences down to nothing. And then of course there's a new law on the internet that goes into effect on August 1st, I believe, which requires any social network or email service or communication service operating in Russia to maintain basically FSB-ready servers with exhaustive information on users. So I think that will lead to the shutdown of Facebook and Twitter. And finally, bloggers, standalone bloggers, are now required to register in much the same way as the media are. Anybody who has more than 3,000 or 2,000 daily visitors is now, in the eyes of the law, equivalent to a media outlet. So, for example, I would be somebody like that. If I were in Russia, I would be answerable to, under the law, the way that a newspaper is.
Masha Gessen, thank you very much.
Thank you.